Welcome to the Card Text, an unofficial mini-podcast about Marvel Champions at the LCG. We cover rules discussions regarding gameplay and aim to help fans of the game better understand the inner workings of their favorite Marvel card game. This is episode 8 of the Card Text. Today's episode we're going to cover one of the big RRG 1.4 changes, the new defense entry. Today we only have Theorel here.
Hi, everybody.
Scott couldn't be with us in this episode because we had to kind of rush to record, and he was unavailable. But we will be covering it best we can, and Scott did give some input that we'll comment on as well. RRG 1.4 was released this month, May 2021. In it, one of the biggest changes was the defense rule alteration, making this the second time defense was changed, or has changed. We've come up with a series of 3 player aids to make the defense rules easy to learn and teach, if all goes right. But there were also some ambiguities that we had to kind of leave unaddressed.
So with the release of the new 1.4 rules, I think it is important to mention that at least having read through them, I think that it was a good way of handling the situation that we're in. There were some ambiguities in the rules originally, and I think those carried through into the cards, which has caused a little bit of a challenge, I think, in how to express the rules clearly and how to handle all of the varieties of situations that have arisen, with card wordings maybe not being as precise as one would want them, and the way in which the rules have shifted a little bit over time. Overall, I think the 1.14 rules are really a good, I guess, change of pace from the previous rule sets. And so it's, as much as the designers can sometimes get a hard time with things that have gone on, I do think that this is a light shining in the darkness for for whatever else might be going on.
Yeah. Overall, everybody loves the changes that came out because it brings back the interactions that were missing from the last version. And all I've heard is good things about the changes for defense. What we're mainly going to be talking about is defense, and we're going to give you our best reading of it. All 3 of us have read it, back and forth, over and over again. We put together these cards to try and help people easily get through each specific situation. One covers if you want to defend, the other covers if you're taking damage, and the other is just a bit about defense label cards in general. But what we want to say is that it largely works the same fundamentally. You still are using cards you control to defend, and the main change is that now defense label cards being triggered by a player makes that player character the defender. And thirdly, there can be only one defender, which is another change. Previously, there could technically be multiple defenders, but we didn't have those rules. We didn't have those rules long enough for it to matter, and there wasn't any information in the RRG on how to handle multiple defenders. We have 3 cards. Defending parts 1, 2, and 3. Theo, if you would also read the Captain America bubble, that'd be great.
So, defending card part 1. Captain America says, so, want to defend with a hero or ally. During step 2 of an enemy attack, you may exhaust a hero or ally you control to defend against the attack. That hero or ally becomes the defender for that attack. You may use a defense card during an enemy attack according to its triggering condition. If you do, you are defending the attack as your hero without exhausting. If you defend with your hero, you defend as that hero. But if you defend with an ally, the ally defends for you. If you defend for another player, the villain attacks you instead. You resolve any relevant effects of the attack. This includes boost abilities. And as a note at the bottom, did you know you can now play Desperate Defense after becoming the defender with Preemptive Strike, and it will ready your hero if you take no damage.
Thanks, Sia. Yeah, that's the first card, and that card is specifically focused on you either defend with your hero or your ally, and this typically will happen during step 2. That's when defenders are declared. Defending part 2, Captain America is saying, so you may have incoming attack damage. The first point is only exhausting your hero to defend allows you to reduce attack damage by your basic defense value. Second point, an ally defending an attack will take all of the attack damage dealt by that attack, unless that attack has overkill. Thirdly, if no hero or ally defends, the attack is undefended and all damage is dealt to your identity. The last point, boost ability damage, which is not damage from an attack, may cause a defending ally to be defeated. This results in an undefended attack. Note at the end, did you know protection, justice, leadership, and aggression cards are aspect cards, but basic cards are not aspect cards? Very, very important point.
Defending card number 3. Captain America says, so, about those defense cards. Firstly, you may play or use a defense card during an enemy attack and according to its triggering condition. This counts as your hero defending. Secondly, once a hero defends, no other hero's controller may play defense cards. Thirdly, if your hero is defending, you may play any number of defense cards according to each card's triggering condition. And fourthly, a defense card generally will not allow you to use your basic defense value to reduce attack damage. And the note at the end, did you know playing a defense card with a when you defend timing cannot cause you to defend an attack? You must exhaust your hero or play a defense card with a timing you meet first.
So those are the 3 defense cards that we worked on to help people kind of digest each specific situation, whether you're defending with a hero, your ally, or using a defense card. So those should help people, navigate the basics of defending there. But the most important part, and it is important, is that interaction is back. Once you resolve an effect that is labeled as a defense, you're considered to be the defender now. And that can occur after step 2, and I guess theoretically before step 2 as well. But as long as you play it as long as you use it during its triggering condition, during an attack, and it has the defense label, you are defending.
The point being just that player's identity becomes the defender and is considered to have defended the attack. We want to talk about some of the more advanced points.
So yeah, getting a little more into the details of how defense works. So something that might be a little more complicated when you have more interactions and such. The defense label cards that you use don't allow you to use your DEF stat. However, in the future, there could be cards, possibly, that say in the ability specifically or explicitly that, hey, you can use your DEF stat when you play this card somehow. So that could allow you to apply the defense. But for now, most of the cards that are defense labeled don't have that kind of interaction. But it could be a thing in the future.
I think this is a lot like attack and thwart, right? There are attack events that use your ATK value. They don't, for example, say that you are basic attacking. They don't say like you're using a basic attack. They just use your ATK value for the purpose. I could see defense cards that say reduce damage by your DEF. I would be surprised if there was a defense card that said you are now using a basic defense. I mean, they could do it. If they did it with an attack card, they could do that too.
our next point in the more into the weeds kind of points here. So using Desperate Defense after using Preemptive Strike.
So the particular relevance here is that you can play Preemptive Strike during an attack when you are not otherwise using your defense, using your DEF. Then you could interrupt that. Since that now counts as defending, you could play Desperate Defense as an interrupt. Your hero has defended. You get +2 DEF, which is meaningless at this point because you're not using your DEF value. But then you would ready if you took no damage. And so if you found some other way to cancel all of the damage, say energy barriers, which can cut damage, then you would be able to say, well, I didn't take any damage, so my hero readies.
Yeah, and it's seems pretty beneficial if you really want or need that ready. It also is a little bit strange because you're not getting the benefit of that defense.
And in particular, just in terms of usefulness, it would require you to already be exhausted for some reason, which is just not a normal scenario.
The next point here on the more detailed or tricky defense stuff, an ally being defeated by boost ability damage while that ally is defending. What happens if an ally that is defending takes 1 damage while it only has like 1 hit point on it? What's the result?
So this is a historical thing. It's from Under Attack. The Passive Blast, I think, deals a damage to all friendly characters. That's the situation that occurred in the core set. Once an ally defends against an attack, no other friendly character can defend against the attack. So if you played a defense card after the ally was defeated, you would be defending the attack after the ally defended the attack, and that's not allowed. The spirit of the rule seems to be if someone's defending the attack, you cannot then do something to defend the attack. So once the attack's undefended, it seems like there's not a practical reason you can't then play a defense ability and defend the attack. But from the strict writing is that doesn't work.
Moving on to the next point is going to be triggering conditions are still important and tell you the point at which you're able to use or play a defense labeled card.
I think the important point here is that it's still the triggering condition. That's the part that hasn't changed. Once you have played a defense card in a scenario where you're defending the attack, that enables you to play a collection of defense cards that require you to be defending an attack. The defense cards that trigger on defending. But the rules change did not enable you. You can't use a card to trigger itself. You cannot play defense cards just to defend. You have to play them according to their triggering condition.
Well, let's talk about Backflip in particular then, because I did want to talk about some of these cards that usually come up when discussing defense. Everybody wants to know how this is going to affect Backflip. So this triggering condition is when damage is imminent, and that damage has to be from an attack as well. So you can't just play this. You can't play it at step 2 when defenders are declared. You can't play it right after the boost is flipped, and you can't play it when damage is incoming to another player to try and block for them. It won't work that way. Did you have anything to say about that specific card and the triggering condition?
So I think the important thing here is that these rules don't change anything on that side, right? The triggering condition side is exactly the same as it's always been. You have to be about to take damage from an attack. How do these rules affect Backflip? So on the triggering side, no change. But on the effect side, once you play Backflip, you've now stopped all damage and defended the attack. That means that you can trigger cards such as Unflappable, which say, if you defend an attack and take no damage, you just did that because you played Backflip. You sort of get to automatically achieve these effects.
Yeah, I think that's very, very helpful way to put it. Next point, the last point being that the defense label doesn't restrict you to playing it during an attack, and doesn't indicate a timing point by itself. It doesn't tell you when you may play it.
So on the one hand, that means that it does not itself provide a new timing point, such as play this card whenever you feel like during an attack. On the other side, it does not necessarily restrict the card to only being able to be played during an attack, which is what it did in the previous rule set. 1.4 removed that particular bit of text. Still a little bit of ambiguity. A few people have said this restriction still does apply. There's sort of an implicit restriction in the text, but based on the article that Caleb posted when 1.4 was officially released, it would appear that that implicit restriction is not correct. For a card that has a triggering condition that could possibly trigger outside of an attack, then he has said you can play it outside of an attack if it meets the triggering condition.
Oh, one thing I did wanted to say about that in particular was that the previous ruling, or the previous RRG, the way the defense worked, it explicitly said if a triggered ability is labeled a defense, such as hero action and defense in a parenthetic, that ability can only be resolved by a player while they're the target of an attack. And that was removed for the 1.4 update. So that particular restriction is not there. And I think people point to, and this was how I read it myself first, 1.4 says during an attack, you can defend in this way, with cards you control. And one of those ways is playing or resolving a defense label card. But I think the claim that the defense label doesn't restrict you when you can play it is actually stronger than the claim that the label is restrictive. The reason being is that the rules do say you may play cards during their triggering conditions, and that bullet that I just mentioned, was removed. And all of that, coupled with the debrief, like Theo was saying, stating that you may play defense cards when their triggering conditions become true, that seems like pretty strong support that the defense label by itself is not restrictive. But there are people that do feel it's restrictive, which is totally understandable. I was at that point when I first saw the rules, so we don't want to take anything away from that reading. When the rules first accidentally appeared, the argument that it was restrictive, what was the argument? They said that because...
I think the argument boiled down to that the defend starts with during an enemy attack, player may defend against it using cards they control, and then within that they explain what happens due to a defense label, using when a player resolves a triggered ability labeled as a defense. There's sort of two ways to interpret that. One way is we're only allowed to use triggered abilities labeled as defenses during an attack to defend against that attack. The other way is to say when it's during an attack and you play a triggered ability that's labeled as defense, then you are defending the attack. One way is to say that, and this is true, is the only time you can do it. It's always a defense. The other way is to say when both of those statements are true, then it's a defense. And that's where Caleb's blog post suggests that it's the second, when both those statements are true.
And using a defense outside of an attack didn't seem viable, because what are you defending if you play like something like Wiggle Room? You're taking damage from Green Goblin's ability. You're not defending anything, right?
Essentially, what the argument comes down to is that you're not defending anything, so you can't do it. You can't play the defense because there's no attack. So, the question is, does that mean that you're just not defending it, or does that mean you can't play it in the first place?
Is there anything else that we haven't said that maybe we should? Actually, yes, the debrief, right? So the debrief that came out, I don't know, Theo, would you say it was controversial, or would you say...
I feel like the debrief ended up being controversial. I was surprised at how controversial it was. Like, to me, it seemed like the defense stuff that he wrote there was pretty clear. It seemed like the U stuff he wrote there was pretty clear. You're wrong. It didn't seem like it should have been controversial to me, but it definitely was.
What I wanted to say about the debrief is that in terms of what it said about defense was largely very helpful. It did contradict itself on a minor note, and I'll kind of explain that in a second. But largely it gives an example of how wiggle room works, how you're defending, what you can and can't do, and for the most part, it's pretty accurate. The one misstep in it is that it seems to be forgetting about the boost abilities from cards like Whirlwind. So basically, we were left wondering after the defense debrief if defense labeled cards can truly be played anytime their condition is true, and what happens if that condition is true during an undefended attack. And I would think you could just resolve it and become the defender.
I mean, I think that the debrief is pretty clearly just talking about the case where someone is taking damage from an attack. Someone is not you. You can't play shield block. I think that's what he's trying to say with that example. It ended up being a little bit fortunate because he uses some kind of absolute terminology that's not absolute. Right.
Right. It seemed as though he forgot that these types of boost abilities could possibly deal damage to everybody at the table, which would allow you to play a card like Shield Block, and then kind of forgot to mention what happens when that happens. Can you play that card? Is it a defense, etc.? That was, for me, the only real problem that I saw in the debrief. Would you agree with that?
For defense, yeah.
Yeah, for defense, yes. The other stuff we'll maybe talk about another time. The whole you thing, that was a little worse. But overall, I think the defense part was really still very helpful, even with that little minor error.
In all, I have felt like I felt like this when Caleb was answering Will's questions also through email, that Caleb tends to be pretty on point with examples. Like rules questions that involved specific cards and how they interacted, he was generally pretty good about. There may have been an exception or two where he had to overrule something afterwards, but generally when presented with two cards, he could tell you how they were supposed to work. The places where he was not so good, and I think Caleb would admit it himself, is in generalities, in saying this is how it works in general. I think that this debrief struggles from that. I think the you example is him trying to give generalities and that it falls short. The defense example, though, the defense situation is him giving some examples, and I think they're pretty clear. Except for, as mentioned, when he talks about shield block during an attack, where he kind of makes it a little bit more general, and then it kind of immediately fails because there's examples that generality fails.
It's also easy to forget that ability is there, right? Because it's one or two cards.
And I think that's maybe why he doesn't do as well with it, because he just, like I say, he's good with the specific examples, and then when he tries to generalize, he's probably not thinking about certain specific examples, where if you presented him that example, he'd be like, oh, that's not how that works at all. So he would contradict his own generalities because he's like, no, I didn't mean that. I meant the overarching case. He gives you a 90% rule. It's going to be true 90% of the time. And he's just going to leave out that 10% because he's not going to think about it. I think overall that's fine. It does become a little bit of a problem when people take his generalities as kind of gospel, or as the rules themselves.
To close out, we'll just close out reiterating our main points about defense. And also the cards are still there for everyone to read. And if you have any questions or anything you'd like to say about them, you could always contact us. But our main 3 points are...
So the main things to keep in mind is that for 1.4 defending, when you exhaust a character to defend, is still pretty much fundamentally the same way it's always been. You exhaust them to defend either defense or just taking the hit for you, transferring attacks. All of that works the same. The main change is that defense labeled cards, interrupts and responses, now also make you defend. And so you can trigger them according to their triggering conditions during an attack, and you are now defending the attack. So that enables some cool interactions that there didn't used to be. One important change in conjunction with that, though, is that you can only have one defender. So if you defend, you exhaust someone to defend, you can no longer, someone else cannot play a defense ability card, a defense labeled card, because then there would be two defenders, and that's just not a situation that works. They've added that rule, which I think is in conjunction with this defense labels counting as defending.
Yeah, so those main points should really be the focus when you go play with the new defense rules. I think that will help you along with the cards. Thank you so much for coming, Theo. I appreciate it.
Good luck cutting this down. Somehow you managed to do it.
All right, listeners, we hope that was informative. If you have any thoughts about the issues we covered or have an idea for a future episode, please let us know here or on Twitter at @thecardtext, or email us thecardtextpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe or follow us for our next episode. As always, when you'd rather not read the rules reference, listen to the card text instead.